Welcome to Mission Imperfect, the podcast about navigating the twists and turns of life and embracing the imperfections of the journey.
We're your hosts, life coaches Catherine and Kirsty, and our mission is to support you in finding your own path, your own way, with greater clarity and self trust, no matter how messy or uncertain things may seem.
We address the roadblocks that come up time and time again for our coaching clients, from acceptance and boundaries to values and well-being and everything in between.
As well as asking lots of questions, a coach's favourite thing to do, we'll be sharing thoughts and insights and offering plenty of tips, tools, and techniques for you to try.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to grab a cuppa and a biscuit and join us in getting lost in finding ourselves.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect. This week, we are talking about the idea of labelling yourself and where it comes from and what does it mean and what can it mean, perhaps for good and for bad. So, Kirsty, tell us a little bit about labelling yourself.
Okay, the idea for this episode came about when I saw somebody on LinkedIn talking about what the way somebody introduced themselves in a work meeting can say about them and their feelings about what they do, and kind of the use of job titles and descriptions of their roles and so on. And that got me thinking more generally about the labels we use to describe ourselves. As you said, where do they come from? How do they affect how we feel about ourselves and our worth and our potential? And the whole topic of labeling, I think, is pretty huge. I mean, we were just talking before we started recording and realised we could have spent hours on it. So I'm going to emphasise here that I'm coming at this from the point of view of how we label ourselves, not so much the labels we that get sort of given to us or sort of diagnoses or whatever that we might get, but more about how we become accustomed to thinking of ourselves and
Yeah,
how that can affect us.
I think it's a really interesting point because when you suggested this as a topic, I thought, interesting, because to me, a label is what I stick on a tub of the miscellaneous item of food that I've baked, put in the freezer, so I
Yeah,
actually know what it is, and I don't end up defrosting curry when I think it's going to be bolognese. Do you know what I mean?
exactly.
I
Yes.
really take things quite literally in that sense, but it did get me thinking because in a way, is a label almost like a super sticky descriptor that we
Oh,
commonly use? And when does it maybe become a label? Is it because it's stuck around for a while or it just keeps coming up? And I thought it's a really interesting question, actually, whether you maybe the point isn't whether you call it a label or how you commonly describe yourself. The
hmm.
point is that we're going to talk about today is where has it come from? What does it mean? And how could it perhaps be a problem, but also potentially a good thing? And I think that is definitely worth exploring, whether you're thinking that you use labels or not, because you might realize from this conversation, actually, that is something of a label for me.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, how conscious is our labeling of ourselves? I mean, we probably all have
Mm.
certain words. If the whole if you describe yourself in 3 words thing,
Yeah.
we probably have some words that would come straight up for us. But there are others that lurk about that are less obvious. But I mean, this could turn into a really long episode, couldn't it?
Just
There's just so many rabbit holes to go down on this one. Maybe we'll have to do lots more episodes on it. But how would we label them? There's the question. But let's start. I mean, where do our labels, the ones we use for ourselves, where do they come from? And I think there are a number of sources, but I suspect they are rarely distinct. I think they probably overlap and influence each other a lot. But I have a bash at outlining where I think they come from. So, firstly, I think not necessarily in order of importance, but I think what other people say about us has a big impact. The words that other people use about us make an impression on us, don't they? And that can even skew our sense of ourselves. What we hear from others can sort of maybe not tie up with how we think about ourselves. And it starts in childhood with our caregivers and authority figures. I mean, who doesn't carry some sense of themselves from, parental complaints or school reports, whether it's too quiet or talks too much, the class clown or the mischief
Yeah.
maker or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it's funny, isn't it? And maybe at a young age as well, you really absorb that. It's funny. I actually did. an email about this just recently. It wasn't quite on the subject of labeling, but I always was described as conscientious. That was the word that came up
Yes.
time and time again in
Oh
all
gosh,
my
me too. Yeah.
in school reports. And it's funny, it's like, did I then adopt that persona? Oh, I am conscientious, therefore I am the person that tries hard with their homework. That, if I didn't do that, that's me not conforming to what's expected. That's who I am, that's how I'm seen, that's how I should continue. And of course,
Yeah.
there's far worse things to be called than conscientious. What if you're called the troublemaker or the joker? Is it possible that you take that forward and think, well, that's why I perhaps don't stick at a job, because I'm the disruptor, the troublemaker. I'm always looking for new and exciting things, or I don't take things seriously because I'm the joker. That's what I've been
Yeah.
told that I am. It's a really interesting concept, isn't it? I think your experience of what you've been labeled as, for want of a better description, when you're younger, it can really carry some weight with you, can't it?
Definitely. And it's not just when you're young, is it? I mean, that's where it starts. But I mean, I think it can carry on throughout. I mean, from your friends, your colleagues, your partners, anyone who matters to you, or anyone who is a significant presence in your life, what they say about you is going to make a difference. And at work,
Mm,
a lot of people have appraisals and so on. So again, they're going to get used to seeing particular words or whatever apply to them. What their strengths are, what the development needs. They take that on as saying something about who they are. And very much linked to that, I think. I mean, we just said about the words people are using, but there's also how people treat us can create an impression. Sometimes people's actions, or maybe their lack of actions, speak as loudly as any words, at least in our own minds, whether they might not mean it in that way. But when the behaviour of others makes us feel wanted or ignored or funny or stupid or troublesome or whatever, that influences our sense of ourselves and who we are, doesn't it?
mm,
And then there's the whole thing about how we think we should be. And I think we often end up labeling ourselves based on how well we think we're doing against where we should be, what we should be, how we should be. We all absorb those expectations and standards from those around us, whether it's family, community, or society. And that our sense of the gap between where we are and where we think we should be, or others think we should be, has a real impact on our sense of who we are and how we're doing. And of course, the growth of the internet and social media mean that it's very, very hard not to be bombarded by often heavily edited images and stories of what it is to be successful or attractive or even just normal, if there is such a thing. And I've left this one till last, even though I think it should be the most important. The labels we use about ourselves can come from our own sense of who we are. And these, of course, are the truest labels. They come from a place of self-awareness and self-acceptance. But it can be really hard to cut through the noise of all the other label sources and find this place of personal truth. I guess that's the whole point of personal growth, isn't it? To increasingly see ourselves through our own eyes and without comparing ourselves to others. So when you can get to that sense of this is who I am, and you start letting go of false modesty and recognizing all the good stuff about yourself, and also be honest about what you want to work on, what doesn't sit quite so well in how you want to be, that's when you get to the true labels.
yeah. So it can come from all sorts of different directions, can't they? And it's really interesting if you get, I think, the same message reinforced through different avenues as well. That can have like a
Yes.
compounding effect. But just on that last one, which I do really like, and of course, as a fellow coach, I'm going to agree, self-perception, the self-awareness one is obviously the one that counts so much. And I think it can include even the aspirational stuff, the
Yes.
this is the kind of person that I want to be. This is what aligns with my values and where the direction I want to take and how I want to be seen and think of myself, actually, even more importantly than that. So just thought we should include
Definitely.
that as well.
And sometimes that whole thing about sorry, my voice keeps going. That gap between how we think we should be, if you relabel that as how you want to be, that can be a very aspirational and positive thing.
Mm.
So I think maybe in talking about where labels come from, there has been a sense of negativity over the labels there, but it can also be a very positive thing, can't it? When
Yeah.
people see our strengths, when we look at how we think we could be or want to be and work on achieving that, that can be really positive.
Yeah.
So, which leads nicely on to how do our labels affect us? In an ideal world, it's very straightforward, isn't it? The positive labels help boost our self trust and self liking, and the less positive ones help us to keep learning and growing. And our labels can change in keeping with that learning and growing. Unfortunately, life isn't always ideal, and often labels come to be treated as personality traits cast in stone. And that can lead us to behaving in accordance with our labels, becoming defined and limited by them rather than just described by them.
Yes. I think that is so true. And I think it gives them more sort of power or sway than actually they warrant. So instead of becoming a description, perhaps
Mm.
one of many
Yeah.
descriptive words we can use about ourselves, it almost becomes the I am this, insert label of choice. It becomes an am as well rather than an experience. And that's therefore sums you up as a person, like the whole thing represented by one, what was a description, but has now become like this set in stone, I am. And I think that can be very sneaky and very disruptive because if you have a label that might associate with failure, for example, and your label is I am a failure, as
Mm.
opposed to
Yeah.
I've experienced failing, as in I failed an exam, is a very different recollection, not a label, I'd say, to I'm a failure, which I'd say is a very
Very
damaging
different.
label to carry.
Yeah, that I really like that point. The difference between describing ourselves and describing what's happened to us or what we've done or our behavior. Those are very different things. And I mean, you touched on earlier, that idea of if you get yourself labeled as the troublemaker, the class clown or whatever, there can be that tendency going forward to sort of live down to it, I guess, to let it affect you negatively all through. And I think that's a concept we're quite familiar with, the idea that if you keep calling somebody lazy, they're going to behave as a lazy person. If you keep complaining about somebody being late and telling them they're always late, they probably will carry on being late. But sometimes even the really positive labels we might use on ourselves can have a negative impact because if it's really important to you that you are kind or helpful, supportive, then it may be really difficult for you to say no to people, even when you're exhausted and resentful of saying yes, because you've defined yourself with these labels of kind and helpful, supportive. If you are used to thinking of yourself as strong and independent, then admitting vulnerability and asking for help, that's not the sort of thing that somebody who's strong and independent does, is it? Even hardworking, reliable, labels like that make it difficult to slow down and take a break. So even the
Yeah.
stuff that can seem really positive can actually be quite damaging in terms of making it feel like it is a definition of how you have to be and not a description of aspects of your personality and behavior.
Yes, that's exactly it. It's like it becomes synonymous with your identity and therefore how someone with X identity therefore will act and behave. And it just becomes self-fulfilling, doesn't it? The
Yes.
cycle will repeat.
Yeah. And maybe we even use the label sometimes as an excuse for staying in our comfort zone. If you have labeled yourself as not confident, then that can be a very good excuse for not having to put yourself in the uncomfortable position of trying something new, of stepping out of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
And I've been pretty guilty of this in the past, I think. You know, that sense of not being the kind of person who does things like that. I'm not
Yeah.
confident enough. I'm too quiet. I'm too shy. It's an excellent excuse for not having to make yourself uncomfortable.
Yes. The funny thing is, though, I think we can all find the reasons, excuses, whatever you want to call them, to avoid doing things that make us feel uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
whether that's through a label or through something else, I think we can all readily find them when we don't want to address something or do something. But yeah, yeah, just hearing you say that, I was thinking, yeah, what labels might I be using to potentially hide behind and avoid something? That's definitely something to give some thought to.
But they can also hold you back in those situations as well, because sometimes, certainly in my experience, like speaking up in a work meeting or something, because of that label I thought I was wearing as the quiet one, shy one, the idea of speaking up, even when I wanted to, when I thought I had something to say, something to contribute, it was kind of, but that's not what I do. That's not who I am. How are people going to react to that?
Mm,
And so weirdly, at times it can be a very good excuse, and other times it can be really quite limiting. But I mean, labels can be very helpful too, because when they are describing something about you, being able to communicate that, I mean, both to yourself and to others, to raise that awareness can be really useful. I mean, in the last few years, I've come to strongly identify with the label introvert, but not in a way that gives me an excuse for never having to socialize. There is a little bit of that going on. It's actually helped me become much more self-aware and understanding of how I need to manage socializing, how I can deal with people and external stimulation. And it means I can manage my social decisions and behavior in much better ways than I was before. I can actually do more in a more positive way than I used to. So that for me has been a really useful label.
yeah, I think the difference you've highlighted there, that's sort of working with the label, if you want to call it that, rather than sort of hiding behind it. So instead of using it as a, I'm not confident, therefore I won't go out and speak and socialize and all those things, it's like, these are my preferences. So this is perhaps how I will work with it. So I don't just avoid all of those things, but I do them in a way that feels more authentic and manageable for me.
Yes, yes. So I think we have emphasized the harm that labels can do, but used carefully as a description of how we are rather than a definition of how we have to be, they can have considerable value. And so, bearing that in mind, a question for this week is what are the first labels that come to mind for yourself and how do they affect you?
And I would just add to that, maybe question if some of those are labels that you've been carrying for quite some time, that maybe don't need to apply anymore.
Yeah,
Or perhaps they've just slightly changed shape or form or weight. Do you know, something about them that
like that. Yes.
maybe isn't as solid as you've been holding onto? That might be an interesting experiment as well.
Yes, is there a better word or description that you could use now that would feel different for you? Yeah, I like that. A wide-ranging question for this week.
Yes, so that was
Uh,
a very uncoachy question because we put quite a few elements into one, which is not what we're supposed to do.
no, it's the kind of things that we'd have been adding on as people answered, isn't it, in our defense?
Yes, exactly. I
So,
like that.
I mean, and if this has brought up things that you feel it'd really be helpful to talk about, then please do feel free to get in touch with Catherine and myself through our contact details in the show notes. We are always very happy to talk about our coaching and what it can do for people. And there's never any kind of obligation involved in that. There's going to be no icky hard sell from us. But if you think it would help, please get in touch. If something's come up that you would just like to share, then again, find us on social media. The links are in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed the episode, please give us a follow.
Until next time, we'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect. We'd love to hear your thoughts on any of our episodes, especially if you've had a light bulb moment in answering one of the questions, have benefited from one of the tips, or have a suggestion for an episode topic.
And if these conversations have made you curious about how coaching could help you, please don't hesitate to get in touch with one or both of us to find out more about what we offer. Until next time, keep being imperfectly you. No one does it better.